on our YouTube site. So please keep that in mind as you decide to have your video on or off if you have concerns about that. And I am super excited to introduce our speaker today. So Dr. Rachael Tatman is a senior developer advocate at Rasa, and there she works on helping developers use open source software to build conversational AI projects, which is a super interesting thing to be able to get to work on. I have heard Rachael speak before on issues from NLP, linguistics. I first met her when she worked at Kaggle, which is part of Google. Her background is in linguistics, and she's worked in lots of different areas. And the focus of what we're going to be talking about today is how to build a data science portfolio. And as I'm sure if you just heard that, what Rachael is doing now and has done in the past, that this is something that's, she has tons of experience in both on multiple sides of sort of that relationship. So Rachael, we are so glad you're here. If you have got questions as we go along, feel free to put them in the chat, and then we'll take some questions at the end.
All right, hello, let me just share my screen. Share and make sure folks where I can see them. Welcome. So this talk is on data science portfolios. And I think it's helpful when anyone's giving you career advice to understand what their career was. So at this point, I haven't actually been on the job market in a couple of years. I think this advice also applies, but things are different now. For example, I know there's a lot more automated resume screening than there was last time I was on the job market. So I'm going to do my darndest not to lead y'all astray, but do keep in mind that I don't have the experience that you have right now if you're currently searching for a job. So a little bit of my history. So my undergrad is in linguistics and English literature. Yeah, I'm an English major from William and Mary, which is in Virginia. And then I came to the University of Washington, which is in Seattle, not St. Louis, that's a different one, to get a PhD in linguistics. And my research was, I liked a lot of things when I was trying to figure out what my research was. But I did a lot of work in phonetics and automatic speech recognition, so more on the signal processing side, a lot of stuff in computational sociolinguistics, which I would say I was one of the earlier researchers in that field, and then ethics and fairness, accountability, and transparency in NLP. And after that, I, full transparency, was trying very hard to get a faculty job, and it did not happen. And, as happens with the overwhelming majority of people who go to grad school. So I started at Google as a contractor. And I was still at that time, because contracts end, very much searching for jobs at that point. Once I'd gotten pretty far in the interview process with another position at Google, the team that I was on was like, actually, we do want you. And they ended up converting me. That is pretty rare. If you are working as a contractor, I would not count on conversion. That is unlikely, to put it very bluntly. And I was there for a while. I was pretty happy. And then Rasa reached out to me. So they're a startup. They're based in Berlin, and they work on conversational AI, fancy chatbots, like machine learning chatbots, basically. And they build a framework. And I was like, well, this sounds interesting. I'm not really looking for a new job. And then I talked to a bunch of folks on the team, and they got me. And I used the framework. And I was like, oh, these are all the design decisions I would have made. I really like this. So that's why I'm at Rasa. I was poached. And as a result, the last time that I was really actively on the job search market was a couple of years ago, when I was still a contractor and looking for other jobs. General stuff. So data science, I'm sure this is not news to any of you, but it's very fast moving. It's kind of loosely designated. The boundaries are very fuzzy. And what you'll be expected to do at a specific role, and what someone who is opening a job for data scientists thinks a data scientist can do, changes quite a lot. So the survey results in here are from 2017, which, oh my God, that's what, 4 years ago at this point? Keep in mind that those may not be the most accurate things, but I think the general trends still hold. And again, I'm sure most of you have heard this advice, but if you haven't, if a job is looking for something specific and they have like 10 requirements, if you've got like 3 of them, go ahead and apply. Those are wish lists. Those are, the hiring manager or the HR department talking about how they want a pony and a castle. And if you have, a miniature horse that you have at your uncle's farm that you can go visit on the weekends, that's close enough. Just go for it. And when you're on the job market, when you're looking for jobs, you are trying to sell yourself, right? You're trying to convince the person that you're talking to, whether that's a hiring manager or someone who's interviewing you, that you will be able to do what they want you to do and you could do it better than anyone else that they're talking to. And that means having a really clear understanding of what it is that you bring to a role and also what sort of roles that would be a good fit for. And, like I mentioned, I have not been on the job market this year, which I'm deeply thankful for because it's rough times out there, and I completely understand that. And so I would say, especially when you're job searching, especially when you're career transitioning, very, very common for folks in data science, or even just like going over a job title, try to give yourself lots of what ifs and lots of sort of imaginations of how different roles might work on you. Maybe you've never considered project management, but you run a lot of lab meetings and research maybe, and sort of help people deal with their work. And you're like, oh, I can kind of see myself doing that in a technical place or with a team of data scientists. And just be nice to yourself, take breaks, exercise. I know this seems like awful advice, but it's very stressful to be on the job market, and physical exercise, even like I used to do a lot of Pilates in my living room, and I also do a lot of Pilates in my living room, really helps you deal with the stress. Really, 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 I absolutely promise. There's a ton of research on this. There's a really good book called Burnout, Breaking the Stress Cycle by a couple of psychologists if you're interested in more. So this is my very best advice to you if you're looking right now. And you got this. It's going to be tough. It might not be, but it might be tough. And you're a strong, smart person, and you can do it. So that's my pep talk. I hope if you're currently looking, you feel pepped. So with that in mind, how can you set yourself up for success? You can build a killer portfolio, a portfolio that says, hire me. I'm so good at my job. Don't you want this level of quality at your company? You do. You absolutely do. And you're showing off what you can do for someone who wants to hire you. So a couple of things to think about there. First of all is, what type of job specifically are you looking for? What type of company are you specifically looking for? Where do you think you'll be a good fit? Where do you think you'll be successful? And how can you convince the hiring manager of that? So the first time I applied to a startup, I really talked about like all my experience and like how good I was at staying on schedule, and look at all these papers I published. And the at the end of the interview, the CEO who was talking to me was like, "You're not a good startup fit. Pass. Like, you just wouldn't do well here. Peace out." And that kind of hurt my feelings a lot. I felt pretty crushed. And it turns out that I do work pretty well in a startup environment, but I wasn't communicating that well. And I didn't understand enough about what the day-to-day work in life would be like to communicate that well to this person and convince them they should hire me. So knowing about the work you want to do or you're going to be trying to do, and then also picking out really relevant skills to that job. And again, this is from a while ago, but I think that this really does still hold. Professional data scientists don't tend to work everywhere, particularly our community. Y'all know this. They tend to be in technology. People that have a lot of data tend to be in technology companies, not always, but, or they're academics and they're researchers. And this includes things like think tanks. It's not just all career tenure track professors, and then finance. And again, particularly for I think this is not news for many of you. So maybe these are good places for you to start looking. Startups versus established companies. So I currently work at a startup. Previously, I worked at Google. I don't think I need to tell you that Google is an established and large company. And they're different roles. So at a startup, you'll wear a lot of different hats. You'll touch a lot of different job functions. Things will change quickly. You need to, stability even from quarter to quarter is not really guaranteed. So if you are comfortable with that, startups can be a really, really good place. There is a certain level of job insecurity. And to be clear, the startup that I work at is pretty stable. I'm not worried about that in particular, but I did a lot of due diligence when I was talking to them about potentially taking a job. And particularly, right now, things are very much in flux. Will the startup exist next year? You don't know. Like, question mark. So really, if you're looking at a startup, it can be a great place. You can definitely thrive there, but be very realistic about the long-term prospects of the company you're working for. You'll generally be more generalist, and especially if you're newer to data science, you're probably not going to have a senior mentor. You may be the only data scientist. You may be the only data scientist and also kind of the DBA and also kind of the data engineer and also kind of the machine learning engineer. And you're probably not going to have a manager who has a lot of knowledge about your specific field. So just know that that is very much likely to be the case if you're in a smaller company. In a larger company, you will have one job. It will be very clearly defined. You'll have lots of structure. You'll have lots of process. Generally more job security, like Google is probably going to be around for a little bit. I would be surprised if it went away entirely. You can specialize more, right? So at Rasa, I work sort of with all of the open source part of the project and like a little bit of the free but not open source part of the project. But at Google, you will work with your specific thing. So there is a developer advocate, that's my particular job title, who works on the JavaScript API for Google Sheets. And that's their job. That's their focus. And you'll probably have more access to senior mentors. So if you like sort of a large institutional progression, a larger company can be really good for that. Some related job titles and career paths, particularly for folks who are transitioning into data science or academia. I found that they may not always have a good understanding of all the different job titles that are out there, and you may like pigeonhole yourself. I will only apply for this job title, even if you might be a really good fit for something else. So machine learning engineer, this has become a lot more stable. Right now it means I am building machine learning systems and productionizing them and maintaining them once they're up. So that's what that job title means. At this point, it's become a lot more stable. Data engineer, usually there's like some sort of database management. Usually there's some sort of data cleaning. Usually there's, ETL work in there. That again is becoming more stable. UX researcher, if you have a background in the behavioral sciences at all and you like running experiments, this could be a fantastic job for you. You'll also do data analysis. A lot of you UX researchers use R, but you'll be basically like seeing how product work for a person and then figuring out like, was that good or bad, and having specific research questions and guiding the product teams. These you're more likely to find at medium and larger startups. They're not usually like one of the first 10 employees unless it's a really customer driven focused company. Developer relations. That's what I'm doing. I'm a developer advocate, which means basically that you speak to developers externally and for developers internally. So you give product feedback and guidance and sort of have a bead on the community and understanding of what they want and need, and then communicate in both ways. And then technical program or project managers. So you help get things done. And these roles specifically have certifications. So if you're interested in this, I'd recommend looking into the certification. It is a little bit spendy, but if you think that this role would be a really good fit for you, it could be worth it. And of all of these roles, project managers and program managers are the most flexible because every industry needs good project managers. All right. So domain knowledge, you're putting together your portfolio, you know the type of job you're looking for, you know the type of company that you're looking for. How can you show that you can do the sorts of things that they are looking for? I like to think of this in types of data, particularly for data science roles. Oh, thank you, Kelsey. Kelsey says it's great so far. Can't wait to get the recording to share. Well, shucks. So types of data, and this is sort of in order of how important I think they are, roughly. Tabular and relational data. If you want to be a data scientist, you should know how to do things with CSVs. Again, I'm sure this group has got that box ticked. Text, you would be surprised who has text data. It's most companies I have found. So if you perhaps are familiar with some sort of package called Tidy Text that works really well, and I would recommend, it might be a good thing to brush up on. There's a book that's really good by some nice authors. Julia was one of the co-authors on the book, and it's great. I would recommend showing off Tidy Text in our portfolio in particular. Image and video stuff. This is a little bit more specialized. I found that fewer people actually have image and computer vision problems than have NLP problems. Time series, geospatial, and these are things that it will make sense for you to focus on if you have background knowledge there and you're interested in working at a company that would focus on this, or not even a company like a nonprofit or a governmental organization that would focus on that in particular. And then like very specific domain stuff, like if you're a geneticist, do stuff with genetics data and show that off. Couple of options. One would be to show really deep expertise in a single field. This is a little riskier unless you know it's a field people are hiring in, right? So lots of people are hiring for NLP. Showing deep domain knowledge about text data, I think, is a pretty good, will open up a lot of roles for you. Showing a lot of deep domain knowledge about genetic data. I'm not as familiar with that field. I would assume there are fewer rules for geneticists than there are for NLP people, but again, it'll depend on the specific roles you're going for. And option 2 is like a little bit of everything, a little bit of a smorgasbord. I would say that this is going to be better for more junior data scientists. So if this is your first, oh, you can't hear anything. Can anybody else hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. We can hear you.
Okay. All right. So it sounds like a personal issue. But thank you for letting me know. And hopefully someone can add in the chat. So smorgasbord, I would recommend for a more junior data scientist, where maybe you're coming out of undergrad, maybe you don't have a good idea of the specific field that you're interested in, and you just want to try a bunch of different stuff and cast a wide net. Junior roles are generally less specialized. And I don't know, you can do this on your own time, but one thing that you can do is think about what you've already done, your current work experience, whether that's course projects, whether that's stuff you've done in a previous role, whether it's projects you've done on the side for fun. Where do they fit? Are they like a little bit of a smorgasbord? Have you done like one thing with tabular data and then a bunch of stuff with text data? Maybe you want to work on specializing in your portfolio a little bit more. Will the slides be available? Yes, the slides are on my website, rctatman.com. I'll put the link in a little bit later. So again, these are from 2017, but this is pretty stable. And this is from the Kaggle Data Science Survey, which is a big survey of data scientists in different industries and stuff. Oh, thank you, Julia. And far and away, relational data is the most common type of data. I don't think that's a surprise to anyone. Most companies have at least one database, followed by text data, and in academia, and then military and security, if that's an area that you think it's worth putting your labor into. Text data is actually used a little bit more. So that's why I suggested having good text domain knowledge can be really helpful for roles. Things that I would recommend every portfolio includes at least a little bit of. Showcase your knowledge of, Python, R, Julia, SPSS was the thing I was looking for there. MATLAB, maybe. There are people who hire for MATLAB. And really show like, hey, I know how to write a test in this language. You don't have to be at the level of a professional software engineer, but like some degree of software engineering skills can be really helpful. Show that you know SQL. You're gonna have to use it. Just like be like, hey, look, I use dbplyr. I ran a query. You too can have your database queried by me. Visualization, something that when people send me their portfolios to look over, I will often point out is like, hey, you did not maybe choose the most helpful type of visualization for this data point. So using like a line to show categorical buckets, for example. Not making those decisions, I think, can help really show off that you're more mature as a data scientist and you've really thought about what do these numbers mean, and can really show that you have, you've thought really critically about the data you're working with. Some degree of storytelling. As machine learning engineering becomes clearer as its own role, there's less expectation of data scientists doing that. There is more expectation of data scientists being able to pull on a BI, business intelligence roles, and be able to tell a story and communicate well to stakeholders. Also use the word stakeholders, that's very businessy. And then if you are interested in doing this in your day-to-day work, maybe like a small deployment project, maybe building a little API or something, or a nice shiny dashboard, some sort of end project that someone can be like, oh yeah, I can see myself using this in my work. I can see my company needing one of these built. Or again, NGO or whatever it is that you're looking for. This is going to change a lot. The Kaggle community in particular has made some design choices that sort of prioritize Python over R. But Python is the world's most popular programming language. Lots of people are looking for it. R is better for what R is better for, which I don't think I need to tell this group about. And then SQL, most people would like to know. And then Jupyter Notebooks are the most common working environment. If you're working in R specifically, I'd probably use Markdown instead, but that's personal preference. And this shifts all the time. And if you are putting together a portfolio for a specific company, I would look at the skills that specific company looks for and then use those. and be like, look, here am I using Jupyter notebooks, just like you said that your team uses. Look how well I'd fit in. Specific machine learning techniques to show off if this is something that you're interested in. Again, this is from Kaggle users, so there is going to be pretty strong preference for labeled cases is supervised machine learning. Wow, a little bit more coffee for me. Logistic regression, decision trees, random forest, and then number 4 is neural networks. And I would say, again, if you're looking specifically for data science, more analytic rules, neural networks, I wouldn't focus on them. It takes a lot to learn. It's hard to provide a good principled understanding of why a neural network architecture works because kind of the field doesn't know. So do you need all algorithms? Absolutely not. I would focus on I would have a conceptual understanding of, I would have like a broad conceptual understanding of most of the things on this list. I don't think you need to be too deep into Bayesian stuff unless you're already deep into Bayesian stuff. But you don't need to have implemented all of them from scratch. Again, I would say like show what you can do very proficiently and that you can explain very clearly. If you're showing code, spend a little bit of time gussing it up, right? This is put on your Sunday best, company's coming. You want to make sure that people are like, yes, this is my finest code. Look how well it's commented. If you do like inline tests with print statements, get those out of there. Just tidy those out of there. Use version control. You don't have to use GitHub, but something like GitHub is really, really helpful. Again, you're likely to be working on a team that does use GitHub or GitLab or some other sort of integrated version control system. And if you can show that you already know how to use that, they'll be like, ah, yes, of course, we won't have to teach them this. Pick a style guide, use it consistently. I happen to like Tidyverse. Pick your own. If you use a linter, if you don't use a linter, do use a linter. It'll make your life a lot easier and it'll look more professional, look cleaner. For Python, we use Black at Rasa. It just changes stuff for you. It's very opinionated. And also, this is my biggest pet peeve. Break your project into multiple files. So if you've got little functions, put them in the separate utility functions file. If you're doing data cleaning, do that separately. If you're doing modeling, do that separately. If you're doing model evaluation visualizations, do that separately. Break it down into small digestible chunks that a human would want to read. I don't want to see your data cleaning unless the data cleaning is relevant to me. I just want to see your model evaluation, right? So it just shows that you're respecting people's time and that you understand how to organize projects. And it's not just like one enormous, untitled.r that has all your work in it. And don't stick everything in your portfolio. So if you are applying for multiple jobs, I know this stinks. I know this takes so much time, but just like people are like, cover letters do matter, cover letters do matter, unless you're just being stuck right through the automated resume grinder. Cover letters matter. You should write a cover letter for the company that you're applying for. And what you include in your portfolio for that company also matters. Don't show in every single student project, right? If you've done Titanic, don't share Titanic. Everyone's done Titanic. That's not going to be interesting or helpful. Avoid sharing the data cleaning. Show people that you've done the data cleaning. Let them check it out. Be ready to talk about the data cleaning in interviews, but don't be like, and here's where I removed NAs and I made this decision. I don't care. I would assume that if you're applying for data science roles, you have those skills already. I would avoid EDA. So this is something, again, I see a lot with people looking for junior roles. So they've got like a data set. They're doing like a very unstructured exploratory data analysis. There's like a bunch of transformations and then a chart and then a bunch of other transformations and a chart. There's no comments. It's just like they tried a bunch of stuff. That's an important skill. You will do that. I don't need to see it. That's not a good use of my time. I want a clear story. I want you to pretend like the first thing you did worked, or you have a very clear story about why the first thing you did didn't work and why you used the second thing instead. And you've removed all that sort of like you sketching and doodling in the margins. And also, I would check for grammar errors or clarity. I'm dyslexic. I have somebody look over my stuff when it's high stakes because I'm definitely not going to not have typos. Whew. Okay, some sample portfolios. These, again, you can see these are from 2017. This is one of my favorite portfolios, actually. So Nathaniel's was a freelance data science consultant. I think he works somewhere now. It's just like a very simple blog, but it's an interesting mix of projects. And the thing that really stood out to me is that the applications of techniques were not the traditional application of technique. And it showed me that he really understands what this is doing under the hood and what it's good for, and that he can apply that in a novel way. And to me, that's like, this is a mature data scientist. So this top one, he was looking at a Lego data set. And he treated the colors as terms and did topic modeling on it. So given the colors of the bricks in a data set, what can you tell about, what the brick categories are in? Anyway, I didn't communicate that well, but it's a really interesting use of this technique. And it shows me, you know what's going on. Yeah, it was a really good post, the LDA color post. I forgot that this was in here. Another really good, you can tell this hasn't been updated in a while. Actually, is no longer Stack Overflow. Another really good sample portfolio. Really good mix of projects, some for work, some for fun, and a lot of expertise in NLP. So if I was looking over this, I'd be like, this person understands text data. They really know what they're doing. They're a mature data scientist. I would hire them. I did forget that wasn't there. Maybe we should have hidden that slide. Didn't mean to put you on the spot. So Amber is, she's a journalist at The Pudding, and her work is really in visualizations, like one of the best in the business. She does such good work. And her portfolio is stunning. Each of these visualizations is beautiful, tells a story. Like the front end design is absolutely wonderful. It's all custom. You can like interact with them in different ways. Really, really cool. And she's a journalist. And each of these stories, I'm like, oh, I want to learn more about that. It really piques my curiosity. So it also tells me, oh, she's a good journalist. She's like, looking into new problems and providing good samples of her work, right? So this tells me, would I look at this person and hire them as like a machine learning engineer? Maybe, but I would definitely hire them as a data journalist because they have a portfolio that really, really focuses on what they want to do in their day-to-day job, and they're killing it, right? Like, I'm like, yes, this is a good mature person. Know a lot about their role. I would absolutely hire them. And this is from Iodeli, who I actually think she just got a new job. So this is also not accurate. I should have gone through and looked through these. And this is for a portfolio from when she was a student. She's now, I believe she's an AI ethicist. And she's got a really good mix of projects. So like I mentioned, especially when you're like newer, it's perfectly fine to have like a wide sampling of different things that you've worked on that show like, hey, I understand all these different things. And I really like the way that this is laid out. We've got the name of the project. We've got the technique that was used. We've got a description and then a link to the GitHub. So I can go and look at the code. It's all well organized. It's very easy to read. And I can see, okay, I understand what technique she's used. I understand her understanding of it. And yeah, again, I would hire her. Ooh, Amber Thomas is on the job market. Somebody hire her. She's so good. So those are some samples. I imagine she will not be on the job market long. General tips. I would include projects you're genuinely excited about. And if you're tailoring specifically to a particular company, you may have to include one or two that you're like, I did this, it wasn't the best time, but it's very relevant for this role, so I'm going to include it. And the reason is they're going to ask you about it, and they're probably going to ask you about it in detail if they're looking to hire you. And you should be able to talk about it, and you should be able to, even if it wasn't your favorite thing ever, like be clear in your communication and be like, yes, I did it. It was a good job. And like, here are the challenges that I overcame. Here are the successes, and I'm proud of this, right? If you're not proud of it, don't put it in your portfolio. Oh, that is a rough one. Can you please suggest how to showcase work projects considering restrictions on code and data? Yeah.
Pretty interesting topic. Do you want to save that one for the end and we can talk about that?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah,
so
let's come back to that one at the end. I think that's a really good question though. Like, because it's not like for people who are maybe getting their first jobs.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, we can definitely talk about that. So sticking a pin in that. Unique projects are better. The more memorable your portfolio is. So like somebody mentioned, oh yeah, I remember that project on Color LDA. I think it was Julia who mentioned it. That's good, right? Because then people remember is like, oh, you're the data scientist who like sorted pugs or whatever it was that you did, right? Like, oh, I remember that project. I remember you. I remember it being good work. And then it's more likely that, they'll call you back. Right, for humans, right? Your portfolio in particular, your audience is other human beings. Do not include code-only notebooks unless they're like hidden down, and actually never include code-only things. You should have substantial comments in your portfolio to show what you're doing so people can understand, because they're not going to have shared context for projects that you're putting in your portfolio. Make sure you know what's going on in your code. Make sure you can explain it. So I think this is something that particularly for students, if you were, you were working on a project while you were learning and maybe you were sort of following an example, perfectly fine, but you should know what each of the lines of code in your project does and why it does that. And if you don't, and somebody asks you about it, that's going to cast sort of a bad light over all of your work. So again, if it's something you don't really understand, just don't put it in your portfolio, right? It's fine to have learning projects, but you don't necessarily want to be like, look at this project that I don't really understand what's going on in. I wouldn't recommend that. Unlike these slides, make sure you update things semi-regularly. So I try to keep my personal website updated. And, I'm a developer advocate. So for me, the output of my work is mainly public facing things, right? So it's talks, it's blog posts, it's stuff like that. So for me, I try to keep it updated. And if you do that, it's turbulent times. Even if you're fantastic at your job, maybe your company stops existing, maybe your department gets cut. Just being prepared is going to save you, a lot of panic in the long run. And get a website. Absolutely get a website. GitHub pages are free. That's what I use to host my website. You can write in R. Blogdown's really good, but 100% be findable online. And if you have a very common name, be findable online with your desired job title, right? So if there were other Rachael Tatmans, I think there's one other Rachael Tatman, but she's not very online. I would be like Rachael Tatman, data scientist, NLP, and that would be like everywhere. I would put that to make sure that you can find me when you're searching for me. I'm lucky in that I have an uncommon name. A last tip, and this is, if you talk to hiring managers or HR people, they'll pretty much all tell you this: don't look at job boards for jobs. It can be a good way to see who's hiring, but A, they're not updated very often. B, if you submit your resume there, it does go through the big like resume churner, automated filtering. And if you are not like exactly the candidate they imagined, you're probably not going to get through. If you are doing that, I would look at the job description, and for the projects in your portfolio or the roles that you've had, the ones that are relevant to that job description, I would copy and paste that text directly to give yourself the best option of the best chance of getting through the automated sorting. It's rough. So for people who are already employed, recruiters are really good. They're looking for people who have some experience. And I think that can help with Joe's question of getting around, not being able to really show off your work. Families, friends, or colleagues. Once you're in the field, you tend to sort of know more people in the field, and it can become easier and easier to find your next job, which, I don't know, that's rough to hear if this is your first job that you're looking for. And job boards, just not ideal. If it's your first job, company websites, I would always apply through the company website over going through a job board. Always, 100% of the time. Role-specific job boards. So for developer relations, for example, there's a specific job board for developer relations jobs where people post when they're looking for folks. I keep an eye on that. It's also good to know who's hiring, even if you are not necessarily looking right now. Maybe you'll run into somebody at a meetup who is looking, and you'll be able to be like, oh yeah, I heard that JetBrains or whatever is hiring right now. So you might look into them. So yeah. And then if you are looking for a book that goes into a lot more detail, Emily Robinson and Jacqueline Nolis have a really good book on building a career in data science that I would highly recommend, that goes over sort of the job search process. And then once you're hired, how do you know that you're advancing, right? How do you take a long-term look at your career? Because if you are a millennial or a Zoomer, you know that you're not going to stay with a company your whole life. They may like you as a person, your team may like you, but they're not invested in your whole lifetime, with some very, very, very rare exceptions. So you're going to move around, and that means that you kind of have to be in charge of running your career, which is, a gift and a burden, both of those things. All right. Oh, and the podcast. Yes, the podcast is really, really good. All right. So
Yeah, thank you so much, Rachel. That was amazing. Amazing. So there was one kind of short question, and then maybe we'll dig into some of these long ones. So, Rachel, what's your opinion about having a blog name that's searchable that isn't related to your name? Like having some, like you see things out there like I don't know. I've seen things. The example here is like data plumber, but I know I've seen, oh gosh, I've seen all kinds of things out there, like people who have funny names or cute names that are not their actual name. What do you think about that for like
perfectly fine.
SEO or
Yeah,
identity, professional identity?
Yeah.
Yeah.
If you're building your own blog, I would make sure that you have like yourself in the author field, just so it's, better for SEO. But yes,
Searchable. Yeah.
particularly if your name is like, I don't know, John Smith, having a more memorable blog name or a more memorable portfolio name is going to be really helpful if people are, again, looking for you in particular. So yeah, I think that's fine.
Yeah. Yeah. Do you want to return to this issue of like not first jobs? Because I think that's super interesting. So I like so much of what you said here was I mean, I agree 100% with everything that you said. I think it most applies to people getting their first job, maybe most strongly. I think it does largely apply to everyone, but maybe most applies to people getting their first job. There are some things that maybe become a little more complicated to people getting like not their first jobs. And it one thing I've heard people discuss and like or have challenges around, for example, are say, hey, I have caretaking responsibilities or like other things going on in my life that it feels like an extra part-time job to have public facing work. It seems not fair for hiring people to want that to be like required for me to need to get a job. So that that's one thing that I've heard around this kind of discussion. What when you talk to colleagues or you see people being hired, how much of this do you think still benefits people getting not first jobs? How much of it do you think in what ways is it different? What's your perspective on that?
Yeah. Good question. So first off, if you can't share code or data, that is going to put you at a disadvantage, specifically for roles where they're looking for a public work. And yeah, I've got mixed feelings on this. Like one thing, on the one hand, it helped me be able to get a role in data science to have this public portfolio, and I understand how important it can be. On the other hand, it is absolutely unfair, right? Like I was putting this together like as I was finishing my dissertation in graduate school, and it was hell. It was a very rough point in my life. I look back at pictures of me like that, and I look like, I don't know, not happy, that's for sure. Yeah, it's rough. I will say if you already have a job, right? So to my mind, what the data portfolio is doing is that it's showing that you can do this job. If you have already done that job, then that's really good evidence that somebody like hired you to do the job, you stayed in it for however long you stayed in it, and now you're looking for something else, maybe something that's a better fit for your skill set or something like that. So if you've already done the job you're being hired for, I would say that that is probably about as good a signal as the public portfolio to show that you have the skills to be hired for the job. So don't despair. I would also recommend finding a recruiter who specializes in data science roles and works with you. So company recruiters have the best interests of the company at heart because that's who's paying them. And recruiters who work with individuals usually get a percentage based on your starting salary. So they have your best interests in mind and they want you to get hired and make lots of money. So especially if you're in a little bit more of a senior role, I would look for someone who specializes in data science roles, or like if you're a geneticist, someone who studies in genetics roles. And I would look on LinkedIn for that. I know LinkedIn's the worst. If you've invited me on LinkedIn, I haven't accepted. I'm sorry. I need to spend like just like a week cleaning out my LinkedIn for a bit, but that's what I'd recommend if you're in a more senior position. Yeah, it sucks. It's not fair. I wish that it weren't like this. I wish that people didn't care about like GitHub activity streaks, but it is, right? Like that's a metric that's easy to see. And how good of a storyteller someone is a metric that is very hard to see. And, people go for the things that are easy to measure.
Yeah, that aligns a lot with my own personal experience. And then like when I see colleagues, I do think that people who can and do build public like evidence of their work are at an advantage. And I I think that there is some unfairness built into that, like
Absolutely.
based on the kinds of jobs people have, like what else is going on in people's lives. Um, but I think that's just, I think it's something for people to keep in mind when they're in the hiring with like when all of us who
Yes.
are listening to this are eventually in kind of that hiring position. It's something to keep in mind. But as like a job seeker, I think it's something to like know and acknowledge. And like you said, like figure out, okay, in the given circumstances I am in, um, how do I account for the fact that just the reality of like what it is like.
Yeah.
Yeah. There. So you mentioned, so one of the portfolios that you linked to was from someone who had done freelancing. Um, so I know you have not worked as a freelancer, but do you know of any resources, or do you have anything like off the top of your head of like if someone is interested in kind of
Doing
pursuing
freelancing.
that? I will
Mm.
say I actually don't. Like I know a couple people who do it, and like I might start by just sort of following them on Twitter, like to learn what their life is like. But
Mm.
that would be the best I could do as far as like resources. Do you have any resources?
Not off the top of my head, no.
Yeah.
No.
Okay.
No.
I'll drop in the link a few people who I know who are freelancers, but
Mhm.
that's the best I've got there, I think. What other
Oh,
questions?
questions. So Kelsey asked about optimizing. Should I be like, I should picked all these models and this was the best, here's the accuracy. Yep, I think that's a great way to show off model evaluation. I would also include, in addition to just accuracy, things like, runtime, cost of compute, because leaderboards in academic journals don't care about that yet. I think there's a shift towards it. But if I am paying you to build the model and also I'm paying for the compute, it matters a lot to me if you spend 4 times as much on GPU time. So I would also include that in your evaluation, personally. You could work on fake data, synthesize data to show. Yep. But again, it sucks. I know. I wish I had a more equitable answer for that, but I don't. How to do personal branding according to you? Any tips? Ooh, yes. I actually had to talk about this, and I was looking for the slides recently, and I don't think I ever got a copy of them. And the talk is no longer available because it was a joint talk with someone who participated in practices that are not very professional. Put it that way. Yeah. So I have two answers to this. So one is, don't try to do it like super consciously, right? Just notice what sort of patterns you have in your own behavior and like the things that you're interested in, and just highlight those. It can come across as really, like, people who brand themselves as like a thought leader or thought expert, like that comes across as really insincere, and it can sort of bite you in the butt. The other answer to that question is, if you've ever watched professional wrestling is a masterclass in personal branding. And I would say the main things that come out of that are like repetition and clarity, right? Like, my name is Rachel. I am not necessarily always the clearest about what it is that I'm doing, and what I'm focusing on, right? Because like you could see like in my research list, I didn't have like one phrase for all my research. I was like, here's my bullet points. So my branding is very much like someone who's interested in a lot of things, someone who has like wide ranging, context and sort of understanding. And then head of marketing at Kaggle once described me as folksy, and I think I am pretty folksy. Like folksy and approachable would be sort of my personal brand. But it's gonna depend on you. Yeah. Christian says a passion for the work, which is a double-edged sword. Yeah, passion doesn't pay the bills. It can help motivate you, but I don't know. It's work, right? It's labor. You're getting paid for your time and expertise. And I feel like that is a very healthy relationship to have to your work. Oh, suggestions for showing curiosity. Yeah.
I think that really comes through in people. I mean, I think that really comes
Interviews.
through well, and also in people's writing, like
Yeah.
in that like I mean, I think that's something that really comes through when you write about a project or analysis you have done. Like I think that depending on how unique a data set is, like how excited someone is about what they have done, like I think that is something that can be clearly communicated in the process of building a portfolio project.
Yes.
Yeah,
Definitely. Or finding out new data sets and being like, I looked at this because I was interested. And also just sort of like outside of work, oftentimes people ask you like, what have you read lately? That's an interview question I get a lot. And my answer is never data science stuff. I'm reading a book on Paleolithic fiber arts right now, like the history of textiles and like, what do we know and how do we know it? I'm curious. Also like weird, that sense of curious as well. Example of a freelance art developer, Charla. Joe says, experience with question. We often talk about showing the impact of a data science project. Such impacts are often not obvious. Any suggestions on how to show impact in such case? Oh, yeah. So the rough thing about data science, like UX research and like a lot of related fields, is that we are providing information. And it is up to the people that we provide the information to change their minds based on the information that we provided. Which means, and it's the same in developer advocacy as well, right? I can make a product recommendation, but I'm not the product manager, right? I'm not in charge of what goes into the next release. I can just be like, hey, a lot of people have had this suggestion, a lot of people have had this problem. I think it's important that we deal with it, but like my job is to like find that information and share that information. And I think when people are looking for impact, what they're looking for, particularly for more mature data scientists, is like how well you can convince people and how well you work with your team and how well you build consensus. And those are hard to show. And if you are, trying to work with somebody who just like does not value your input at all, that's kind of out of your hands. But if I were looking for a really clear-cut example and I had one, it would be like, here is a problem that I identified. Here were the changes that were made, right? So like, I noticed we had a sudden spike of activity from this, IP address, and I discovered that it was a Bitcoin miner, and we blocked that IP address, blah, blah, blah. I noticed the problem. I suggested the solution. The solution was adopted. You may or may not have those examples depending on your team. Politics. More questions on our developers on Upwork. Good to know. I have a question. If I'm focusing mainly on R, is that going to be relatively tougher to land a position? It depends. Do you want to work at a company that uses R or not? I will say that in terms of I love R. Probably my favorite programming language. Not probably, definitely my favorite programming language. Great for what it's great for. I don't need to tell you all that. R is kind of unique in that it's been sort of consistently popular since it was S, and has been growing in use. But if you're interested in being in technology long term, I would recommend becoming familiar with at least one other language. And like if I had to pick one, it would be Python, just because it's so popular. I mean, that's what I do. I mostly work in Python these days, even though my heart is purple. Yeah, I don't think it's necessarily going to limit you if you're going to want to work in fields where R is the number one language. It will probably limit the roles that you can take and the jobs that you can have, and also understanding the differences between R and other computer languages will really help you for technical interviews. So I, like when I was at Google, I interviewed in R. And one of the questions that I got in my interview, without giving too much away, they were basically like, hey, we want you to hash a data structure. And I was like, okay, so this is what I'm doing with R. And I won't be hashing it because I'm using base R here and there are no hash data structures in base R. And like, here's the reason why in history of the language. And I understand if I was doing it in another language, I'd do it this way, but that's not the language I'm interviewing in. And you said I could pick any language, so I did. And being able to have that discussion to be like, okay, I understand the limitations of the tool that I'm using and how it sets into this like whole set of tools, super important. Even if you even if you don't know C, right? Knowing sort of like about pointers and like how that's different to how R works, and how if someone's asking you a question, oh, they're trying to get at pointers, and I can be like clear about, you know, the differences between these languages, will help.
Yeah, I want to chime in there too, that I agree so much, Rachel, with what you said. And I think that it's not realistic for anyone who works in any language to say, I only work in this language. And so just like as anyone who works with technology and works with like languages, it's not realistic to say, I just learned one language and that's the only language I expect to ever learn and use. And so being able to know how to learn another language, know how to understand that there are specific characteristics of your language, of different languages, is important. I think it's perfectly fine to be more effective and fluent in one language than another, but that it is important to be able to say, I you know, like, yes, I'm familiar with other things. I think the original way that question was stated was like, is probably like, if I am most fluent in R, is that a limitation for getting data science jobs? And it is true that there are probably by number, you know, not probably, that it is true that by number there are more Python jobs than R jobs, right? Like there are more Python data science jobs than R data science jobs. It is also true though, especially as you get to bigger companies, they're more likely to have understood that they need to support bilingual, or they need to support bilingual teams, or they need to be able to support people coming with different you know, fluencies. And so it's like, oh yeah, you can work in R or Python or a mix of both, you know. So so you might find, if you are currently most fluent in R, you know, that might mean it would be better for me to be at a place that is like an R shop, or a place that is a little bigger and thus has built out their infrastructure to be able to use both.
No. And I will say R jobs are less likely to actually be machine learning engineering jobs.
Yeah,
like,
for sure.
They actually wanted a web developer, but they say they wanted a data scientist. It's a little bit rarer in R. And there was a question that I saw scrolling past. Ayush says, how important is knowing cloud or deployment tools like Docker, Kubernetes for junior data scientist roles? It depends. I would say not super important. I am currently learning more DevOps stuff because I support a developer community where DevOps is a big part of the workflow. For most data science roles, that's not going to be super central to your job. It might be, but I would say particularly for junior data scientists, I would say it's probably not going to be the majority of your time. So if it's something that you find interesting and you want to learn about, do it, go ahead. But you may be looking for more of like a DevOps or data DevOps role than a pure data science role, if that's something that you're really, really interested in. It'll vary.
So I know we're at the hour and I want to be respectful of Rachel's time in addition to yours. So maybe let's just take one more question as we wrap up. So Joe here asks about interviewing, and asks about like how data scientists don't typically spend time like using like manually handling data structures and writing algorithms from scratch. Do you think, have you had experience where like that, you know, you just said in your Google interview, like they asked you about that kind of thing? Is that you know, is this something that's like part of the interview process commonly? Is this something that's like important to be prepared for? what's going on with these like things, especially when people come from more stats backgrounds and maybe they're like, what is, what's going on with like, algorithms from scratch and data structures and that kind of thing.
Yeah. Yeah, so I will say that I, in my interviews, was not interviewed by data scientists, even though I was going into a data science role. And that is pretty common, particularly if you are, say, at a startup. And again, you're going to be the first data scientist. And usually when people think technical interview, they think a very specific set of information. So if you haven't been recommended this yet, if you know that you're going to be interviewed as if you have a computer science degree, as if you are a software engineer, the book is called Cracking the Coding Interview. And they will assume that you know what's in that book. It's just the standard book. Everybody uses it. You'll get questions pretty much directly from it with some of the details changed. And that's really down to, like, I don't need to work with pointers in my day-to-day life, but the expectation is that I should know about them to make sure that, like, people like, is that a software engineer? Kind of, like a little bit, to like meet people where they're at. And it's not necessarily because it's important for the job. It's because, again, there's this metric of like, how well do you do on this specific type of interview that is only relevant for a job that's kind of sideways to yours, but you might be asked to fulfill those expectations as well. My hope is that that's going to stop being a thing. And like, there's a lot to know within statistics and machine learning without also having to know all of computer science and software engineering beyond what you need to do your day-to-day job. And I hope that we get to the point where people understand that and stop conflating us.
Yeah. I think so. When I was trying to career transition, and I did a lot of interviews, I would say that like a quarter of my interviews had those kinds of questions on them. Yep. And maybe like 3/4 of my interviews were just more like statsy data science, what seemed more reasonable. I don't know, it seemed more reasonable to me. So yeah, so I definitely think that happens. I will say once I had experience and was interviewing for not my first job, I haven't gotten any of that anymore. Like I don't get any of it anymore, which is kind of interesting. I don't know. Okay, well, I want to say thank you so much to everyone for their great questions. Thank you so much, Rachel, for this. Just such for covering such an important topic, for all your perspective and thoughts, and for your really helpful coverage of this thing that affects so much of our lives. If you joined us today, we are so glad. We would love to have you next month. I'll just one more time drop the link so you can see what we're doing next month in June, where we're going to be talking about creating infographics in the we're creating infographics in a reproducible way in R. So we would love to have you next month. And with that, I will say thank you again so much for everyone for coming.
Thanks for having me.
We'll see you all around. Thank you.